Everybody, and welcome to the fourth day of the Daily Creative Challenge for Adobe Premiere Pro. Today, we'll be taking a look on how to save our footage, how to get the best out of it, even though we might be thinking, that seems unusable. So we are waiting for a few others to join. Meanwhile, for those of you being here for the first time, let me quickly explain how the Daily Creative Challenge works. If you go to behance.net/challenge/premiere, you will find a website with a blue button that will take you right to the challenge. You can sign up for it. You can also join the community chat on Discord and see us, let us see what you're working on. And this way we can also provide feedback, but you can also provide feedback for each other. We'll be later taking a look at one of the videos or one part of the videos and also see how we can actually incorporate that into what we're doing today. Other than that, if you've missed the streams of the last day and you'd like to recap them, you can also do this here. The challenges unlock every day, but if you sign up for the challenge, you also get notified in time, of course. And other than that, you can download Premiere Pro down here, join the chat community, another possibility for this. And now, without further ado, let's get into today's challenge. And let me say hi to Tim, Gareth, Zachary. Hi, nice to have you guys here. Like I said, for today, we want to take a look on how to get the best out of our footage. So I said on the very first day of the challenge that I want to kind of simulate a run and gun situation and this is what I did in my early days, which pretty much were last year. I shot almost everything on auto. I did not really use a log profile where I would capture the most dynamic range I could. So I only had a limited range to work with in my footage. And this is also the case here. Most of what I've shot is either pre-colored or shot in a standard profile, or we had auto settings like auto ISO or auto white balance. And you can see this in some parts, but that does not mean that our footage is hopelessly lost or that we cannot do anything with it, but we can actually work towards improving it, and even to the point where it is absolutely fine and good looking. Now, the first shot that I have here looks actually quite fine to me. What we will be using today is the Lumetri Color panel. You can find the panel if it doesn't show up in Premiere by going to Window and then just looking for Lumetri Color right there. What we're also going to need is our Lumetri Scope panel. I personally like to use the waveform, and I have set it to Luma. I could also set it to RGB. This way I also see what is happening with my colors, but the display of Luma is really what I need. So I'll make sure, okay, I can see where my blacks are. They should, in the best case, not be below 0. And my whites should not be above 100. We will later take a look at an example where it's at the limits. So like I said, this shot is actually looking quite fine for me. What I might do is just have a look if I'd like to brighten it up a little bit, but actually that feels fine. So one first tip I'd like to give is you don't always have to go with round numbers like 1 or 2. What we could do instead is to be a little bit cautious and do something like 0.2. I think I'd like to warm it up a little bit, so I can do that manually by either typing in a number, like I might go with 10, or actually using the slider. This looks fine to me. And I might also see if I'd like to correct the tint. Do I want it to be more greenish because we're in the forest, or do I actually want a little bit of magenta in it? Let me reset that. Now, like I said, this shot actually looks fine to me. This shot is a bit different. Like you can see, this is heavily underexposed, and you can also see in our Lumetri scope that pretty much all the detail we have is down here. So the first thing I want to do, and this is really one of the tips that I'd like to give, just go for it. Just try and don't be too hesitant. Sometimes we want to be cautious with what we do, but in this case, let's pull the shadows all the way up and see what happens. So there actually is a lot of detail. We can actually stretch this out and see what is happening. Now, I think stretching it all the way up might be a bit too much. So maybe let's go with 75 in this case. And we might also put up our exposure, 0.5, something I like to start with. Let's go maybe even to 1. Okay, that looks good. But my problem is if I put the exposure up to high, you can see back here in the highlights, or let's move even a bit further back. What I might do is just use the auto option and see what it does, which will be an autocorrect. And you see, okay, we can see a lot now, but the highlights back here are way too bright for my personal taste. So instead, and I almost always do this, I will go from scratch, go with 75 in this case. And I think going with a value of 1 for the exposure is all right. And I might play with the highlights. What I sometimes will do is just slide the slider back and forth to see what it actually does. Personally, I like to drag them down a bit. I know already that I would like my image to be warmer. What I still might do if I want to get sure that I get the correct white balance, that I get the color balance that I had on the day that this was shot, I might go to my white balance selector here and look for either a white space. This isn't perfect. Normally you have a white card or a gray card to use. Sometimes a gray space may also work. In this case, like I say, I don't really have that card in any part of the image. I've just shot it, but I figured that it sometimes works if I select an area that is close to white or gray. And you can see it does correct the image. It makes it a little bit more greener, it makes it a little bit more warmer. So for my personal taste, I like to warm it up even more to 10 or 15. Okay, this is already looking way, way better to me. What I might also do is drag up the whites a little bit, but you can see, let me reset this to 0. When you look at the Luma scope here and I drag up the whites, they will start to clip. I don't want that to happen, so I leave them as they are. The blacks are looking good for now, just so you see what is happening. When I crush the blacks, it's all going down to 0. That's definitely not looking very good. I might add a little bit of vibrance. So one way to intensify the color is to pull up the saturation, which I these days do not like to do so much, but I'll rather go to the vibrance slider and just pull it up a bit. What I personally now like to add is I actually want the shadows to be a bit more brighter, but if I only pull up the shadows, it starts to get a bit muddy. So instead, I will move from my basic correction here to the color wheels. And the color wheels are also very intuitive. Another possibility to manipulate your image would be the curves, which are, I wouldn't say difficult to get in. They basically do the same as the sliders do, but it's a different kind of, I would say, approaching color grading, but you can also additionally add them. But for now, let's concentrate on basic correction and the color wheels. And what I will do is I will drag up my midtones a little bit. Okay, this actually looks way more balanced out. Another thing I want to do is I said I want this image to feel warm. Now the shadows still feel quite cold. And what I can do now is I can do this for the midtones and the highlights as well. So I can, when I slide these sliders up and down, actually make my picture or my midtones, highlights and shadows brighter or darker. But when I start to drag on these circles here, I can change a little bit of the color tints. So now I, for instance, went for a warmer tone in the shadows. And you can see that when I select and deselect this. And this is looking already better to me. Maybe a bit much. You have to be careful with those. Now, if you feel that you made a mistake and you went like all the way up here, ooh, that's not looking good, and you'd like to reset that value. So what might feel a bit daunting is to slide it all the way back. Instead, you just double click and reset it to the standard. So warm it up a bit. Okay, this is looking way better. Do I want it a bit brighter? Maybe, let's go maybe for 1.2 or 1.1. Okay, and one effect or one function feature that I like to add to my program editor is this one. It's the global effects mute or the global effects. When I click this, all effects will disappear. So if I do this, I can see this was my image before I didn't do anything to it. This is my image now. And I don't know how you feel about this, but I feel this is pretty much unusable because we cannot see what is actually happening, where in this clip, it's looking fine. So let's play it back. Moving forward. Okay, I actually, now that after I played it back and I saw how the next clip looked, I want it to be whoopsie, not 7, a wee bit darker. Okay, there we go. And for instance, I could say this image now in comparison feels quite a bit bright to me. So I might here maybe do the opposite, move a bit back and drag the shadows down, just not to make it too complicated, and adjust those a little bit. Okay, now let's take a look at the opposite case. This was pretty much retrieving everything we have from the shadows. Or actually, before we do this, let's talk a bit about stabilization, because in these shots we have in the woods, everything is moving quite quickly. We also have, as we're speaking about this, some shots will just not have the detail to bring it back. This, for instance, was intentionally shot so that I would just have a silhouette. So if I would drag the shadows all the way up, you can see we are getting some details back in the background, but not in the foreground. This is just a silhouette. So you can also, again, see this here in our Luma scope. And that's the reason why I'm saying try and go for it and just get a feeling of which shots are savable and which aren't so much. Here, for instance, I can definitely bring a lot of those leaves back. And if I feel that my highlights are a bit too much, I might drag the whites down. So you can see it here. Let me drag this up a bit bigger. My highlights are clipping here and my whites. So I will drag them a bit down until they just so touch the line. And I might now bring the highlights down a little bit. Like I said, I want the forest to feel nice and warm. This is a bit too warm. And just move up a bit here. And we can really bring out a lot with this. Like I said, now let's move quickly to stabilization before we get into the highlights. I will do the highlights. I'm saving them for the end because I'd like to show you an additional effect, how to smooth out your highlights. For now, let's take a look at this first scene. There's a lot of camera movement, a lot of camera shake, which I personally actually like, but I don't want the scene at the beginning to feel like it. This week's focus really is story, and I want my story to be, or I want my shots, my visuals in the beginning to be very static, like locked off. And then we introduce a lot of movement in the forest. And here at the very end, we will have some camera shake again, just to make it feel a bit more natural. So the idea is to kind of mold these two ideas, having static shots back here, having moving shots in the middle here, and then at the end have a calm vibe, but with a little bit more movement in it. Let's take a look at this very first part. Every story needs to start somewhere. Some start gradual, cautiously, slow. So on the one hand, we are having our adjustment layer zooming a bit in. This is what we've added on our own. This shot was shot on a tripod, so there is no movement, but here you can see quite a bit happening. And what we're going to introduce now, or what we're going to add, is the warp stabilizer. We're going to put it in here, and then we'll go to our effects control panel. And 50% is the standard value when we have smooth motion. I usually feel that's a bit much, but let's take a look at it. Start somewhere. So what you can see is happening. There's a little bit of warp going on, which is not only what the warp stabilizer does, but it is in partly also the fault of the camera I was using in the IBIS, the in-body stabilization. But let's go down to maybe 10%, which is something I will usually go for. Start somewhere. Looks already better. Sometimes I will go down to 5%. Every story needs to start somewhere. Okay, still quite a bit of movement. Now what I might do is, instead of going from smooth motion, I want to select no motion in my warp stabilizer effect, just because I know and I want this to really feel locked off somewhere. And that looks good to me. So let's copy the warp stabilizer. You can either do this by hitting Command C on the Mac, or right click and copy. Then we go to this scene, paste it in here, and this. And when you paste the warp stabilizer, it will not always automatically analyze. So sometimes you have to hit the button in the effects control panel. You will get notified with this blue bar here. And the longer the clip is, the longer it, of course, or the more information is in the clip, the longer it takes to analyze it. But luckily, these are very short clips. And now let's take a look at our first portion. Every story needs to start somewhere. Some start gradual, cautiously. This was what I was going for, and I'm happy with it. So we have now corrected our footage with the shadows, which is just perfectly, I'm saying it and having this shot here, I'll just quickly correct it so that I feel good with it. Okay, highlights a bit down. I'm basically doing what I just did in the beginning, repeating it quite quickly here. So if you get used to it, these adjustments are really happening fast, and I'm still going through a lot. When I do my videos, I'm going really clip by clip, but you don't necessarily have to do this, and we will take a look at this tomorrow, how you can apply an adjustment layer and save a lot of time. So like I said, now let's go to correcting our highlights a little bit, or let's go to overexposed footage. As you can see, this is quite bright, and we might now take a look of what we actually can get out of here. As you can see, our Lumetri scope shows us that in this case, like really a lot of the whites already have been clipping, or like there's no more information. So even if I drag my whites down, there's not much information that I may actually recover. The shot is actually also brightening up a bit. But what I still can do is, as you can see, there's quite a lot of space here. So the blacks are all the way up. Depending of what I'm going for, I might leave it this way. But what I want to do now is to see what it does when I drag them all the way down. And we can see it kind of introduces a bit of contrast back to the image. So we might also drag the shadows a bit down, which makes our talent a bit more visible. And then we might go for the highlights. And as you can see, I'm dimming the highlights here a little bit, so they're not as harsh anymore. Yet I might try to fix this even a little bit more. Like I said, sometimes you can go for an overexposed image if you really want to have that. And because I want my beginning scenes, those and the end scenes, to feel very soft and easy, I might as well give them a dreamy look. So what I did just now is I hit the Option key and then drag my clip above. That basically duplicates the layer with everything in it, with all effects on there. And what I will do next is and I've used this effect quite a few times now in our daily creative challenge, is the Gaussian blur. And if I set my value now to say 25 or maybe 15, you see this looks very blurry. Let's maybe just do 25. I will also select to repeat the edge pixels just to get sure that the blur is stretched out evenly. And this doesn't really help, right? So now we might go to our opacity option in the effects control, and then I'd go for lighten. Sometimes I will go for screen, but as you can see, this is again not really helping. Where lighten, on the other hand, if I reset this to normal, actually lets our shadows and midtones shine through a little bit more, but this still is too much, right? Or if I just disable our top layer, you can see this is very, very soft. You can go for that, but it looks almost too dreamy for me. So I might go down to 50% or even 25, so that we still have a slightly, quote unquote, dreamish look. This is the easy and the quick way. I personally find something else that I like to do. And I don't know if this is right to do or if it's perfect, but it works for me and it gets the job done that I want to do. So let's reset all my values here and delete the Gaussian blur for now. Instead, I'm first going to add a Luma key. And now we're going to disable the bottom layer, and you can see what the Luma key basically does is it lets me key out parts of the image based on the Luma. And I will now manipulate the cutoff to really select only certain areas. I think if I go to 90 or 85, this might be what I'm actually going for. It is important to toggle off the bottom layer if you drag the layer above, because otherwise you won't be able to see what is actually happening. So far we haven't really done anything but keyed out a part of our identical image. And what I will do now is I will reintroduce our Gaussian blur, drag it on, and then I will go overboard like I did all the last days to 100. Maybe let's even do 200. And wow, this is way too much. Again, repeat edge pixels, but then again, we're going to change our opacity to lighten. That's going to help a bit. And now we're again lower our opacity. I'm going for 25% here. And as you can see, there's a slight little glow here that just softens out the highlights. This works for me. I lately like to add this effect very often. What I'm doing now is I'm holding on the Mac my command key, selecting the Gaussian blur, the Luma key, the opacity, and I'm going to copy it because I'd like to see how it will look like if I drag it, for instance, on this clip. Okay, softens it out. And this clip again. Now you can see that didn't really happen much. So to correct that, let's toggle off our bottom layer and we can see, okay, there's not really much happening. We haven't really selected anything, which can be because I went totally overboard with the Gaussian blur, or because we actually need to reduce our cutoff. So let's maybe go to 75% and see what's happening if I go to 100. Okay, it's really just parts of the image, but even that might work to just smooth things out a little bit and make it a little bit more dreamy. I'm actually seeing a question now. How do you, Z by HB, how do you handle when the camera travels from a dark spot to a lighter spot? Do you keyframe the Lumetri adjustment? I might actually do that. And I did this when I didn't know how to manually set my camera, but I had to fix it in post. Then I would do exactly that. And I would try to, we went over this yesterday. I will, let's go to this clip. What I will do then actually is to, for instance, keyframe my exposure here, keyframe my exposure there. And to make it feel a little bit more natural, I will use the ease out and ease in options, which will show when I actually right click on my keyframes. That's the way to do it. Other than that, the better way to do it is to actually set your camera to manual and handle all the adjustments manually so that you have full control of what you're actually filming. So if you want to film from a dark spot to a light spot and you want the exposure to just remain the same, this is what you can do with manual settings. If you like it to actually change, auto or auto ISO, auto exposure might work, but I feel that it very often overexposes and not necessarily gives me the effect that I want. So this is really, I would say, a matter of planning beforehand and deciding beforehand what you want to go for. I hope that answers the question. All right, cool. Now, in the last few minutes, let me show you one more feature. I saw Dorina, which provided one of her films use two different shots of fields that I shot on 2 different days with very different white balance. That's the word I was looking for. We have this shot. And then we have this shot. And Arena was absolutely right to use those 2 shots because they just go well together. I've already prepared them here, but as you can see, they're quite different. So let's go to our first shot and actually adjust this to our liking. So I will increase the exposure a little bit, actually drag the highlights down, shadows up a little bit, maybe the contrast. So I'm just going to fix it rather quickly. And then we're going to our color wheels and match. Now we're actually going to match something. I'm going to hit and go for the comparison view. And now I want to, and I'm setting my pointer to this clip that I actually want to adjust. And let's have a quick look. This is 144 in my timeline. This is my reference monitor. So I go for 144. And it should appear here. Oh, excuse me. I just hit in the wrong place. This was what I was going for. And everything I'm going to do now is I'm going to apply match. And you can see we're almost there. I might adjust this a little bit more to my liking, but this is also how I can super quickly match the shots. Our time is up for now, but stick around. The next stream is already coming up. If you have any further questions, please feel free to send them via the community chat on Discord. I'd love to take a look on them. And also, let me see what you're working on. I love to provide feedback. Other than that, we're going to see each other tomorrow for the last challenge. See you then. Stick around for the next stream.